how the ego, of course, first has to be formed in childhood, how the construction of the ego is actually a very important part of child development. And then how, of course, the deconstruction of the ego is a very important part of spiritual life. And I had mentioned in that the deconstruction of the ego, the annihilation of the ego, however we want to speak about it, is not a fun process. It's not something that is enjoyable while it's happening. I mean, obviously it's for a much greater good, and there's a much greater awakening and opening, and you're open to something that's even more beautiful. But I had mentioned that I remembered going to Pujya Swamiji at one point with tears running down my face, and I said to him, nobody ever told me that when you annihilate my ego, my heart's going to go with it. So she was asking to elaborate on that. When we think of the ego, sometimes we think of it just meaning my arrogance. Like if you say, oh, well, someone's very, egocentric or egotistic. And it has to do, typically when we say that, with a sense of arrogance. But the ego is much more than that. The ego is actually our whole identity of ourself. Our ego is how I think of myself, the good and the bad, both. And as we were speaking earlier today about identities, my identity is very important to me. And this is why when people lose a lot of money, for example, or have a car accident that disfigures them, or even with teenagers, their face breaks out with acne, or whatever, these sorts of things that cause a great deal of not just physical, logistic issues like I've lost my money or I've had a car accident, but there's a separate and unique level of suffering of what I had identified as now being gone. So in addition to losing my money, I had had my whole ego sense wrapped around the fact that I was a well-to-do person. It's not that I've lost so much money that now I can't eat. I still have plenty to eat. I still have a roof over my head. But I've lost that sense of identity as someone who vacations on private islands in the Caribbean or whatever. So I've lost my money, that's one logistic issue. But the suffering is because of my ego sense of identity that was connected with being someone who had money. I have a car accident and I get disfigured. Well, aside from the physical pain of bones being put back together, I've lost my identity as someone who identified as beautiful or handsome. All of these pieces are a sense of loss of the ego. They're individual aspects. But I'm trying to just help you understand where these things become painful. We identify based on who I think I am, what I think I know, what I think has happened to me. And again, it's the good and the bad. Because being a victim serves me very well as well. I always get the short end of the stick. I'm always the last one chosen for the baseball team. I'm always the one who doesn't have a dance partner. I'm always the one who fails. I'm always last. I'm always ignored. Look, it happened again today. I was waiting for the bus. It drove by. He didn't even stop. See, it always happens. Nobody sees me. So even things that are negative become part of our identity. And then, when on a spiritual path, our guru, our sadhana, starts to pull that away from us, well, giving up our sense of identity is very painful. Because even though in many cases, as I said, it's negative, it's what we know, it's familiar, it fits us very well. If I can no longer identify as being the victim, as being the child of alcoholics, or the child who was abused, or the one that this happened to, well then what is my excuse for not stepping up to the plate and living my life in the fullest, most awake, embodied, creative, inspired, uplifted way? I have no excuse. My excuse is my identity. And if you've just pulled my ego away from me, then I have nothing to fall back on. What I think I know, who I think I am, the importance I think I have in the universe, it all gets dissolved. Have you ever had the experience of lying on your back looking up at the stars? Okay. So it's the very, very tiny, tiny beginning of a taste of what I'm talking about. It's extraordinarily beautiful. It's extraordinarily meditative. It opens you up to an experience and a place that most of us forget. And yet, on some level, it shakes us up. Oh my God, I'm that little? Oh my God, I'm that insignificant? Oh my God, this project really doesn't matter so much? Oh my God, it's a shift is required. We're not even required. We cannot not have the shift. You can't lie on your back, look up at the stars, and walk away the same person you were when you went out and lay down. And that's just, it's the beginning of a glimpse of what I'm talking about. So this is why it's painful. Because our ego and our identity is very safe and it's very comfortable. And even though it's preventing me from stepping up to the plate, and it's preventing me from being the fully embodied divinity that I am, even though it's preventing me from flying when I've got wings and I should be flying, nonetheless, it's very safe and it's very comfortable and it's very familiar. And then the Guru comes and yanks the ground out from under your feet, and your choice is fall or fly. So this is where the heart feels like it's being pulled out. But on the other side, the heart that you thought was your heart gets pulled out. But then you realize that wasn't really your heart. It was just your fear. It was your attachment. It was your subconscious stuff of everybody that you'd ever known, whatever they told you that you'd identified with. So when the heart gets pulled out, something much more beautiful is poured into its place.